Hello, and we are live. And today we have a very special guest for Memorial Day because today is Memorial Day. So, with that, let's get into it. Hello, my name is Krista. I'm the host of the Disruptive Chef Entrepreneur Show. And I know I say this at every episode, but I have a really, really special guy for you guys today. So, for you guys listening in, today is Memorial Day. So, happy Memorial Day, everybody. I have a really special guest. Not only is he a chef, an entrepreneur, he's also amazing around building amazing teams and in leadership. He is an amazing human being, and I'm really lucky to call him my friend. Chef Steve Goddard, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chef.
So, help our listeners a little bit. Give us the 2-minute cliff note. Who is Chef Steve Goddard?
Well, he is a chef who received his formal training, most of his training, and I would have to say most all of his formidable training in the United States military's culinary program.
Mm-hmm.
Grown a lot, was fortunate to work for a lot of great leaders, both in the civilian world and in the military. Very supportive. They allowed me to make mistakes that I was fortunate enough to learn from, and um, teach me otherwise, and develop me.
Yeah.
I was in the military career path, took early retirement after just short of 9 years. Um, got to travel the world, got to eat a lot of food, cook a lot of food. And since then, I've done the same in the civilian world.
Now, I'm just really amazed with your story. And for our listeners, I'm interested to learn more about your beginning of your career. Can you share with us some details about your military service and how it influenced not just your career, but overall your career in the culinary field?
Sure. I was going to school. I was in college for hotel motel management, working in the hotel industry in the restaurant, and got attached to the industry. Obviously,
Mhm.
at that age, that's easy to do, especially in that environment. Um, and I one day I was looking for my next direction, and I went to the recruiter's office, and I joined. I took my ASVAB test. I got a very good score on it, and I chose culinary,
I
which
mean,
at that time it really wasn't a field that people with a good score on their ASVAB test pursued.
and you had no idea what it's gonna get yourself into.
No, actually, there was a couple of recruiters in the office that were trying to talk me out of it, but I was adamant, and I pursued.
And so, talk to us. How was it growing up, as a chef or as a culinarian in the military?
It was great. I mean, it was a lot of work, a lot of hours. We do all the same training. Plus, we wake up earlier and we go to bed later. And when we're in the field, we run a 24-hour operation. Some of the consolidated facilities on post
Yeah.
are 24-hour operations. They're just feeding that many people per meal
Yep.
because multiple units eat there. I was fortunate enough to um, get a very broad scope of responsibilities in that environment. You're constantly cross training.
Yeah.
You don't just stick with one, if you would, one discipline. You go from administrative operations to shift leader to first cook to rations and accountability, where you're doing all the purchasing, and issuing of food and accounting for food, which is one of the bullets in food are very sensitive items in the military.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I'm so fascinated. I mean, for a lot of chefs, including me, I have no clue what it would mean from a logistic side, to feed the troops. So, can you talk to us a little bit about that logistical challenge and managing a food service operation for the military, especially when you're out on the field?
Sure, that was the field. The field's a completely different. When you're in garrison, which is in your regular facility, and you're purchasing food at a subsistence issue point.
Yeah.
It's much like working in, well, contract food service. You're other than the fact you're going to pick up your food and you're doing the shopping rather than purchasing it and having it delivered in the field. You plan your menus, you plan for how many people you're feeding, whether it's a company, a battalion, or a brigade, and you request your food. All
Hmm.
food is accounted for as issued,
Yep.
and you receive regular shipments. You either receive shipments. When I was in Bolivia, we would receive shipments through Panama that were flew into Bolivia and then trucked to us in the Andes Mountains.
I love that. So why wouldn't you buy local food locally? Why did you guys have it shipped in?
Um, that's a good question. When you're in that environment, we bring our own inspectors with us.
Yep.
The scope of what would need to be inspected and deemed to be consumable by the
Yeah.
troops would be too much of a task. Whether it's
Yeah. Yeah.
whether it's meat, I mean the proteins especially, to see the storage and the handling of meat in what at that time was the poorest country in the third world.
Yeah.
Um, we couldn't feed troops that. I mean, you really, one of the things that would affect, especially a battalion, you could be looking at 500 people a brigade. You'd be looking at a couple thousand. If you had a foodborne illness or if there was just an issue with food,
Yeah.
um, that would be a problem. But we actually were pulling fresh eggs. We were eating what at that time we called powdered eggs, which were C rations.
Yeah.
No, B rations. I'm sorry. C's were field rations, meaning MREs or what used to be called C rations in the Vietnam era. Um, we were eating B rations, which are dehydrated, and we reconstituted and cooked
Hmm.
them because storage is an issue too.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So I'm interested. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about, you try to plan all this stuff right, and sometimes it just doesn't work out. Is there a story or two you allowed to share from your time feeding, the cadets, where things went less than perfect?
Oh, there's a lot of those. We always had plenty of food. Let's put it that
Yeah, yeah,
way. But all of our equipment ran on unleaded fuel, so obviously fuel could be an issue,
yep,
especially in the middle of the Andes Mountains. Now a lot of it runs on propane,
yep,
which is also an issue. I mean, when
mhm,
you're in the field. But
yeah, yeah,
yeah, we had a lot of challenges. We had a lot of failures, and we had a lot of successes, especially at high altitude. Um, uh, for instance, the burners that run off of unleaded fuel, when you're at 14,000 feet above sea level, the steel wool that vaporizes the fuel to burn as a vapor instead of
yeah,
a liquid breaks down even quicker. And when one of those things, when the steel wool fails, um, kind of sounds like a mortar round coming in, very loud. It's enough to clear the kitchen. Let's put it that way. Not only that, our cake mixes weren't scaled with the leavening agent for an altitude that high.
yeah,
There was a lot of trial and error. We had baking ranges that the burners went in the bottom that have a plate in between the oven and the burner to evenly distribute the heat.
yeah.
And if you were to open the door to see if your cake was turning out, it looked fine until you opened the door and then it deflated very quickly. So the garbage was full. Let's put it that way. Until we found a groove to work in.
I just find it amazing because people struggle with every day just in the kitchen cooking, having then some of the other environmental issues, and especially being up that high. I can imagine the kind of problem it brings because people struggle sometimes just in the basic stuff.
Well, we had Natick Labs with us too. They were testing our specific gravities, our caloric intakes, and what we were burning because with the lack of oxygen at at that altitude, your body starts consuming its own fat cells
Hmm.
to make up for the oxygen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, but after 4.5 months, when you get back down to sea level,
It,
you
yeah.
definitely have plenty of energy.
I mean, I can talk about that portion of your career forever. Talk to us a little bit where what was the pivoting point where for you where you were thinking, hey, you know what, I want to do this in the civilian world outside of the military, and how was that process?
Well, I actually was discharged twice. I got out after 4 years and thought that I was ready for the civilian world and that I was on the career path. I went to work as a baker because I spent a fair
Yep.
amount of time working third shift as a baker during the time I was in too. And I went to work in the civilian world as a baker. After about 6 months, I figured out that I probably got out too early. So I went back in. And then
Yeah.
I finished. I finished almost another 5 years before I took
Oh.
early retirement. And I was ready for it. I had a plan. And the
Yep.
plan at that time, I went home. I was up for reenlistment. And there was no reason not to reenlist other than the
Yeah.
fact that I went home and asked my wife, what are we going to do? And she said, well, I'm kind of tired of this, of being a single parent because
Yep.
I was deployed a fair amount of time too. And I said, okay. So it just so happens at that time it was during the drawdown, and there was an incentive for early retirement, and it was a good one. I took it, and we made our way. I went to work in country clubs.
So you okay, so you went from a career where you were never home because you were deployed into country club where you were never home because
Yeah.
how did that work? Talk to us a little bit about the transition from the military into that civilian side and a country club on top of all of that.
Um, at that time, they had a transition plan where about 90 days before we got out, before we were
Yeah,
done, we would start taking classes on how to be, if you would, how to be functional in the
yeah,
civilian world. Um, and it was, we got to get our sense of humor back and everything else because we had kind of, if you veteran sense of humor can be kind of dark at times, but um, we went ahead and I took the 90 days worth of classes.
yep,
And it still wasn't enough. I think it probably took about 18 to 24 months before I really felt like I did the right thing.
yeah,
If
yeah,
because when you're in, you get this idea that everything's better out,
yeah, yeah.
communication, everything else. And when you get out, you find out it's really not. And we're easy to pick out at times, especially with our haircut.
Yep,
But
yeah, yeah.
but we um, it took. I think I was picking up something at a gas station one night on my way home from the country club when a guy looked at me and he said, "So how long you been out?" And I said, "About 8 months." He goes, "Stick with it. You'll be okay." But it takes
Oh
a
my
while.
God, it's too funny.
Um, and you still don't shake it. I mean, it's our formidable years. It's how we became adults, if you would. It's probably the best thing I did
Mhm.
for myself and my career, I think.
So went into country clubs. What came next?
Contract food service. I was a sous chef at a country club, at a private country club. Then I was an exec chef for 5 years at a public
Yep.
country club, and then I went into contract food service, which is very much, um, depending on the environment, very much like the military. Obviously, it's a little bit more organized, a little
Yep.
bit more regimented than a restaurant or a private country club. Um, and that was a really comfortable line for me because it's kind of the best of both worlds.
Hmm.
And even then, I went to work for a large contractor, international, um, and I was working in the higher education vertical,
Yep.
and they got a military contract, which was the largest contract awarded, I was a Marine Corps contract for feeding in at stateside
Yep.
on the East and West Coast, which I volunteered to go and open that division. And I spent 5 months,
Mm-hmm.
4 or 5 months doing it. And it felt at home, but it was kind of, it was familiar, but it wasn't home anymore, even though it was a Marine Corps.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
when I say that, it's a standardized food service program across the services. It's just called something different in
Yeah.
every service. And it kind of gave me a snapshot um, of, well, no, it sent a message that I had done the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I actually looked up my first dining facility manager, or mess
Yeah.
sergeant, if you would. He was a sergeant first class. And I found his phone number and I called him and I thanked him for being uh, tough on us.
Hold on. I can bleep it out and say. Uh,
No, I
uh,
actually, and you can imagine, he was a probably mid to late 30s, successful senior non-commissioned officer. I
mhm.
was in charge of about 10, 18 to 22-year-olds. Let's just say when we had the weekends off, his phone stayed busy.
Yeah. You came back on Monday and needed till Wednesday to go back to normal.
Usually Monday to Wednesday were discipline days from the weekend off.
That's awesome. So talk to us, and then and then managing for a contract, you manage obviously a lot of locations. So talk to us a little bit about the principles and the disciplines you kind of adopted from the military. What are useful in the civilian world, and what did you kind of tap into, and how did that work for you?
Well, they were very useful in that. I mean, leadership is one of those
Mhm.
characteristics that is recognized and developed,
Yep.
and you grow
Yep. Yep.
with it. And that's also in the military. Obviously, it's all about people, taking care of your people, which I still do everything I possibly can to do that, um, and being responsible for them. I mean,
Mhm.
when it's time for the credit, you give it to them, and when it's time to, if you would, take the shots, that's what we're there for as leaders.
Yeah, we used to call that to give it to the sous chefs. We are happy to take the praise, and if anybody has constructive feedback, talk to the sous chef. Um, but so now, you kind of lived that military world for so long. Coming into the civilian world, what are some of those principles and challenges you kind of had to overcome in the military? Bringing it into the civilian world, where do you feel the civilian world was a little bit lacking? Because when you bring some of these disciplines in, things are a lot easier. So if you're a new chef, what advice would you have for them to kind of tapping into what the military currently teaches?
Definitely regimentation, discipline, and
Yep.
regimentation. Always being transparent
Yep.
and always looking out for the team and taking care of the team. That's what it's all about. I mean,
Hmm.
we didn't always get along. We didn't. We lived together.
Yep.
Sometimes longer than any of us wanted to. I mean, we laughed together. We shared bad news together,
Hmm.
regardless of where we were, and
Yep.
we fought together a lot. And again, 10 of us, 18 to 22-year-olds, and this poor Sergeant Barnes. I mean, he had to keep us in order. We still had to be up at 5 o'clock in the morning when we were in the desert to pull. You learn that that's the most common time if you're ever going to be attacked. And when we were on
Yeah.
maneuver, there was a period of time where you had to go out and take a post just in case.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you went and did it, and then you came back. And if you were on shift, you started cooking.
Hmm.
If you were off shift, you got rest until it was time for you to pick up the night shift. I mean, normally we served a hot breakfast and a hot dinner,
Yep.
and midday meal was an MRE.
Yep.
When I went to NTC the first time, which is the National Training Center at Fort Irwin, California, we were
Mhm.
serving A rations, which are fresh
Oh,
food.
yeah, yeah.
So quite a bit of that. Meaning, when I say quite a bit, you're well. I can remember making fried pies in the middle of the Mojave Desert, and we got 50-pound blocks of shortening. We had everything to make it from scratch. We had no equipment to make it with, no mixers. So we made all the pie dough by hand, and we were serving 1,000 people. And then we were frying fruit pies,
Mhm.
sealed fruit pies, um, and glazing them
Yeah.
and wrapping them and sending them out along with grilled pork chops and mashed potatoes and corn and UHT milk. If you're familiar with UHT milk, it's ultra high temperature treated milk that's shelf stable.
Yeah.
There were times, especially when you're in 100-degree weather and you don't have ice, that we unfit for human taste buds, but it was still drinkable. Hot milk in the middle of the desert is not a treat.
No, it doesn't sound it.
The chocolate is more drinkable than the white milk.
Oh my God, that's too funny. So within the military, you guys obviously learned how to work under pressure. Do you kind of bring some of the learnings from the military into your current work? How to successfully work under pressure and kind of bring your team along with that.
Constantly. It's prioritizing,
Yeah.
reprioritizing, directing the team towards the main priority, and explaining why they've changed. And
Yeah.
that's another thing. I've had since I've worked in the civilian world. I actually, one of my more recent leaders told me once. He said, "I really like how you handle things. You not only tell people what to do, you tell them why to do it."
Hmm.
And that was a common thing too. I mean, it wasn't just do it, which is
Yeah.
sometimes the incorrect perception of the military. I mean, there's a time and a
Yeah.
place for just do it because I said so. More often than not, it's explained for rationale and reasoning. I mean, and so you understand as you grow into those leadership positions why you had to
Hmm.
do it, so you can explain it
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
the next.
I love all of that. So now looking backwards, where do you think let's call it the hospitality industry, but especially the back of the house, where could they learn some stuff, or what are some of the things from the military they could adapt, which would make that whole industry a much better experience?
Well, I would say, just to get back to the original idea of a kitchen brigade
Hmm.
and the regimentation of a kitchen brigade would be a good step. I don't see that much anymore. I
Yeah.
mean, we use all the terminology loosely.
Yeah.
Sometimes we use the terminology chef a little bit too loosely, but it's just it's no different. It's got
Yeah.
rank, it's got procedures, and it's got protocols. They both do. I just think that one of them is a little bit more unwavering than the other. One world is.
Yeah. I I always look at the industry. My dad kind of grew up in the military. My wife's dad was a senior master sergeant for the Air Force. So I spent a lot of time around that. But
I got a daughter that's one of those.
yeah, and
In
for
the
me,
air.
there was three things I learned. I think we need to do more of. Number one, there was just a whole different level of camaraderie. Number one. The second thing is, um, it didn't make a difference what the ranks were. They all kind of looked out for each other because we were all one. It didn't make it. If somebody is weak, we all chip in because we working for that one. But the final thing for me was just the way the only way I describe it is the level of respect they had from each other. Not seeing them 20 years. I will never forget my dad, retired, and he hasn't seen one of his, teammates, whatever you want to call it at the time, for 25 years. But they were like this, the way they respected each other, how they kind of worked in the civilian world. It's just, for me, it's amazing. And for me, I think that's missing, because as I grew up, I love what you said. For me, I'm still a big believer of the hierarchy of the kitchen brigade, because I think that's how it functions better. And then also because, you know what, it's part, for me, that kitchen brigade was always part of mise en place. Every chef knows where's their station, and they have their stuff, ready to serve. I just think it makes for a better format. And I think it's a sign that I'm getting older, because if I walk into a kitchen where everybody's everybody, and everybody calls everybody chef, is I struggle with that a little bit. Maybe I'm getting old, but it just doesn't seem like it's a good way to move forward. So, what is your take around that?
I agree. I mean that regimentation was part of the basics. And
Hmm.
if I was going to say anything, I would say the industry has gotten away from the basics. And
Yeah.
the basics in the civilian world, again, they waver a little bit more than
Yeah.
the basics in the military. If you don't have the kitchen brigade in the military, you've got the rank structure. So
Hmm.
the kitchen brigade is spoken for already. You know where you stand.
Yep.
And that's a good thing, because then you know what your responsibilities are. And then you know what people can depend on you for. And then you, in turn, know what you can depend on people for. Yeah, there's always going to
Yeah.
be something that happens, and there's always going to be, but again, you become a family.
Hmm.
And through that, you respect each other. And again,
Yeah.
you don't always see eye to eye, but if the respect's there, anything can be accomplished.
I absolutely love that. And I can have this conversation forever. And Droopy told Steve worked with me at one point, and we had a 15-minute interview set up. 2.5 hours later, I was like, oh, I really need to go, because I think there was just, I respect the military. It's been part of my life for forever. And just the level of how I was able to connect with you, and we became friends out of that. And I really appreciate that. And I want to shift gears a little bit, because there's something else really cool about you. But before we switch into it, I want to quick encourage our listeners, if you haven't done so, please join our private community. Go to disruptivechef.club, which is our private community where you get the latest and greatest of all of things we do. It's a really cool community of like-minded people. We do now virtual meetings periodically, and it's amazing on how that community has grown. So if you're looking for a group which is just like you, join the Disruptive Chef Club, which is our private community. So with that, if you just listen in, I'm here today with Chef Steve Goddard, who grew up in the military and built a very successful career around food. So we're talking a little bit, the day's Memorial Day, all of the amazing things he did in the military, and how he brought all of that knowledge and all of that learning into the culinary industry. So, Steve, there's something else amazing you're good at and what you do. So you give a lot of your free time back to training the military staff in their kitchens. Can you talk to us a little bit how you support the military with all of your training programs you do?
Well, when I was working for one of the contractors I worked for, I was very fortunate.
Yep.
They had a government services division, which I got involved with. And that division was working closely with the National Restaurant Association Military Education Foundation, of which I was fortunate enough to take part in some
Hmm.
networking events and some industry leader panel events representing the company in the community, especially coming out of the NRA week here. They do something at Kendall College
Hmm.
for about 225 of the best operators divisionally by service segment. So they're all in Chicago for an award ceremony. Every
Yep.
branch has their own culinary competitions, but they also have an Olympic culinary team. But you compete first at uh, the base that you're on with all of the other facilities. They're large and small facilities, categorized that way. And then you go to a core level. From a core level, you go to a Department of the Army level, like what I was in the Philip A. Connolly Awards. And
Yep.
you're recognized either obviously at a base level for being a winner, core level, And third corps, I think we were in the third corps, which is 4 different military bases, I
Yep.
believe, in stateside. And then against all the winners at the corps level, you go to a Department of the Army level to be called the best. And the Marines have it, the Air Force has it. It's just under a different name, and I'm not familiar with those names. Well, they send them to the NRA show, and there's a large award ceremony. A lot of fun to be at, but they, of course, instead of cutting 225, mostly 18 to 22-year-olds loose on the NRA show in Chicago, they have to link it to an education piece.
Mm-hmm.
So I was part of that education piece for a few years and enjoyed it very much. With that, was fortunate enough to network with the NRA, Military Education Foundation, and did some industry leader panels for the Center of Culinary Excellence, which is at Fort Lee, Virginia, where I went, and that's for all services. That's where they send their senior NCOs for further culinary training. When it comes to the Olympic team and being chosen for the Olympic team, they normally send I know the chefs from the UK used to come over and train,
Yep.
and then pick the best from the bases, the best participants to be on the culinary team for the Olympics. Mm-hmm. And the reason it was the chefs from the UK is, as we understood it, they did 3 years worth of culinary training before they even started their career. So different level there.
Yeah, I love that. So if people want to know more about how to support the military, where could people find some information around that?
The U.S. Army Quartermaster School, or the Center for Culinary Excellence, is at Fort Lee, Virginia. Mm-hmm. They have an open website, so it's a .mil website. But to really learn about it, a lot of in-depth explanation. I'm looking around because I'm surrounded right now by all the recipes I used to use. I got 1,700 of them that I'm working on a database for. And mostly because I referred to these recipes, which are in the Army, the nomenclature is TM10-412, mm-hmm. Because they're vetted, they're tested. Yeah. And when I try to explain this to some of my civilian network, they're not overly impressive recipes, but they have to be accurate. Mm-hmm. Because when we're ordering food and we're giving a recipe number or a recipe to where we order food from or what we're planning for, this is their point of reference. And if they're not correct, we don't get enough food. If they are correct, we get too much. So I can always count on them to be accurate. They're a great foundation. Mm-hmm. And that's why I still refer to them. And I still pull them out of my head. I mean, potatoes, 35, they're based on 100, 35 pounds per 100. You know, all those weights are embedded, because when I joined, our recipe conversion was mm-hmm. literally a calculator and a notebook.
I love that. What else can you share about it? People should know about the programs to support the military.
There's a great program out there right now that I've been doing some research on, that the NRA actually spoke very highly of, which kind of forwarded me to the research called the Skill Bridge program.
Yep.
And when I was in Hawaii not that long ago, I actually met some of the people from the military that were working in it. And what it does is it takes civilian employers, and 6 months before a soldier, airman, sailor, doesn't matter what branch it's in, world they're in, before they get out, they are available for work. When I say mm-hmm. they're available for work, if they're accepted into the Skill Bridge program and the employer is certified in the Skill Bridge program, which is not very difficult. All the
Yeah.
paperwork is on the DoD website. They will report into work for the last 6 months of their commitment in the
Mhm.
military, and the military pays them to be there. Well, you teach them job skills. Now, you're getting a group of people as an employer that haven't looked at a clock. All right, they don't get paid by the hour. Um, they don't know what late is, um, and they don't know. They usually don't know what quitting time is either. And you're getting them free of charge because the
Mhm.
government's still paying them.
Yep.
You're just merely filling out what paperwork or what questionnaires you have to about them being there, accounting for their time, and teaching them skills that they can use in the civilian world when they get out. Not only that, I talked about that 3 month transition, the class where they taught us how to smile again. That was the first thing that they tried to do. Um, you're teaching them how to be comfortable in that world again.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So chances are, I mean, you're creating the next line of leaders in the civilian world,
Mhm.
or your next senior manager, or whatever it might be. It's just a really great program, especially when you're talking about a military MOS, which is military occupational specialty or job in the civilian world.
Yeah.
That's transitional. And when I say it's transitional, if you look at a job like culinary,
Yeah.
I was very surprised to learn how many people I was in with that didn't pursue the culinary
Yeah.
field
Yeah.
because we all knew it. I know some of them to this day that still swear up and down they can't cook. And I cooked with them in kitchens for years, and they can cook.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a skill, and if it's not honed and kept up, we lose it.
I mean, I 100% agree. And by the way, I can have this conversation forever. So if you haven't done so, make sure you guys check out Chef Steve Goddard. You can follow him on LinkedIn. He's on Facebook, so please look him up. It's pretty amazing on his background on the military and how he built a really successful career in the food service industry. But before we go, and before we wrap up, we need to quick tell Chef Steve, my team has picked 3 special questions. So we're going to have rapid fire questions. So we're going to ask you 3 questions and you don't think about it. So just give us the answer. By the way,
Right.
full transparency, Steve is my friend. He has not seen the questions, and he does not know that we do that. So we're gonna highlight some of those answers then. But for now, for our listeners, if you haven't done so, please go to the disruptivechef.club, become part of our community. If you're part of the community, you stay updated. You get all the latest, greatest, what we up to, and how we support the culinary industry. So with that, Steve, before we get going, Chef, rapid fire question. Question number 1. If given the power, what ingredient would you ban forever and why?
Oh man, liquid smoke.
You just made a lot of people very upset.
I've
Okay, why?
actually got 3 of those, and I need to share: kitchen bouquet, liquid smoke, and seasoning salt.
You just that there's a whole category of chefs which live on that. So you just made some people very upset. Question number 2: what is a kitchen gadget which is way overrated?
A zester.
So by the way, we had everything from chefs' attitudes to some other stuff, chefs' egos, but we never had a zester. I appreciate a zester, but I only use them like 2 times a semester, and when I look for it, I can never find it. So I
Well,
use a great.
since the implementation and onset of the microplane, the
Yep.
zester is obsolete. And when you really have to do a lot, you
Yeah,
don't do it with a zester.
no, it's not a fun tool. Whoever came up with it, I totally, I agree with you. So whoever came up with that, damn you. Question number 3: if given the power, what is a dish which needs to go away tomorrow, and why?
Ooh, oh man. Um, Man, that's a tough one. How do I not think about that? Um, A dish that needs to go away tomorrow. There's probably too many of them, Chef.
We had from Sloppy Joe. People feel like there's nothing sloppy about Sloppy Joe besides the guy which works behind in the kitchen. So Sloppy Joe needs to stop. And we had some other really cool ones. So, but Chef Steve, if people want to learn more about you, where can they find more out about you?
Like you said, LinkedIn, Facebook for us older folks, and networking through you.
Yeah. Awesome. We really appreciate, first off, Chef Steve, thanks a lot for the gift of your time on a holiday today. Happy Memorial Day. And thank you for your service. We really appreciate everything you have done. Any final words of wisdom for any of our listeners out there before we wrap up today's call?
Yeah, stick with it. It's worth it.
I couldn't agree with you more. This industry is the most amazing industry. You can do things you can do anywhere else. It's just a really cool, amazing industry. So with that, I want to say thank you for being here. Thank you for listening in. Until next time, remember, disrupt your kitchen, fire up your career, and stay hungry for change. I'm Christian, the Disruptive Chef Entrepreneur host, here with my guest of honor today, Chef Steve. We really appreciate your time. So chefs, go out there, be the change, be the challenge, and be the chef who sets the world on fire. Until next episode, stay out there and stay disruptive. Thanks, everybody, for listening in.